What did you hear in what I just said that made you go,
I'm not really sure.
Not really sure. I wonder if the reason that you did this, that you knitted your brow and said, and went like, it was because I didn't answer your question as you asked it, which is it right or is it wrong? And some of that is because I need to be really clear about my intentions. Absolutely right, because it did exactly what I needed it to do. But wrong in the sense of it's not what I wanted you to you're not understanding it yet. Many of you, I would say roughly 70%, are not understanding it in the way that looks, or are unable to express it in a way that looks like I want you to understand. The second question, which is, explain how education, or what was it? Education is not the same as schooling, or learning is not the same as schooling. I could have picked any of those three terms, learning, education, or schooling, and it doesn't really matter. You'll see that you're going to take it again today, and I'm going to do a little different version of that explanation. But let me ask the question again before I begin. We still haven't even begun lecture. Why in the middle of a classroom of 200 students, with me sitting up here, and at this point at least, with few exceptions, I hope not generating terror in you? Why wouldn't you raise your hand and say, man, I don't get it. What are you talking about? I don't know why, or even just raise your hand and say, and so what? I don't understand why I'm supposed to understand this. Yeah?
Probably because you think everyone around you understands it, and you're the only person that doesn't, and to ask with.
Does that ring true? That you're worried that other people understand it? Okay, but let me push on this for a second. I get some few hands up. Who cares if they understand it and you don't? I'll ask the question. If you are sure that everybody around you understands it and you don't, then why, and I'm here and your TAs are here, then even then, why wouldn't you raise your hand and say, I don't get it? So there's inside, there's an implicit, right? There's something that you're not saying, and I want to see if we can get it to the surface. Yeah?
I thought I understood it, and now I'm confused because you're like telling me that I probably didn't understand it.
Great.
So I just want to know.
Totally. So you're not even hearing this question and answer, so you're like, I just want to know, did I understand it? Am I one of the ones who's in the 70%? Fuck, man, get to the point. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to stick with this one. Right? Because I don't know who you are.
No. I mean, I was just wondering because now you keep telling us like, oh, you don't understand it, and I like you need to like reteach it.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
So like the reason you
we've got
your hand was because you thought you understood it. So
Yeah. So
gorgeous. I see. Thanks for that help. The other thing is, right? The other thing is about this is that inside. I'm going to come back to this. Inside of what you just said. And what a lot of you, I think, are contending with is you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know if you understand it or not, especially when it's just an idea. It's not a thing. Like if if I'm trying to teach you how to hammer a nail, you know if you've got it if the nail goes in, right? If I'm trying to teach you how to surf, you know if you get it because you don't fall off as often as before. Okay? Whereas if it's an idea, you don't know. Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I want to go back to this. If you think other people around you, one of them is you don't know if you don't understand it. I get the point. Like, I don't know if I don't understand it. I thought I understood it. God, am I one of the people who doesn't? Maybe I'm the one. Maybe I got it wrong. But going back to this one, which is that if you think the people around you understand it and you're worried that you don't, or you don't understand my question, you don't understand what I'm asking, why wouldn't you raise your hand in the face of other people knowing and you not knowing? Why not raise your hand and say, God dang, man, I don't get it. Yeah.
We're afraid of looking stupid in front of everyone.
And you learned that.
Yeah.
Yep. Did you hear what she said? If you're on Facebook, get off. Did you hear what she said? She said you're worried about looking stupid? So you don't understand this thing and you're worried about if you raise your hand and say, I don't get it, that not understanding this thing will turn into you're just stupid because you don't understand this thing. And that's related to other people being around you because you know if you're stupid if other people know it and you don't. Right? So your basis for deciding whether or not you're stupid, your basis for deciding whether or not you have anything to fear is how you know something compared to somebody else next to you knowing something. In other words, it's how you rank. Is that fair? How you rank. If other people understand it better, you don't want to be the one who doesn't understand it. If somebody else is reading super fast, you don't want to be called on to read if you read slower. Okay? I don't know what to do about that, except to say, if you can, leave some of that concern behind as a personal favor to me as your teacher. Because if you pretend, if you really know that you don't know, not the situation you're describing, if you know that you're confused, if you know you don't know, if you know that you don't understand something, I want to know. Before we get to the point where there's a quiz. And I don't know how to help you abandon, even for 45 minutes or an hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that fear. Because it's probably pretty deeply rooted. I don't like looking like the slow guy either. I get it. But you learned that. I want to see if temporarily we can suspend it. So that if you don't understand something, you raise your hand or you get online and you say, I don't get it. And if other people say, I do, I'll help, turn off that, oh, you think you're so smart, response. We've got to figure some of this out together. This isn't a race. I promise. I don't care if you failed the test.
I don't care either. No.
Excellent. I'm only looking at you only because we could just have a little convo and then that would be weird for everybody. I just need to know what you understand. And I care that you eventually come to understand it, but right now I just need to know if you understand it. And in particular, you guys all you guys know what the definition of education is, right? You got that? Can anybody just give me the first line? Raise your hand. You can give me the first line. Starts with deliberate. Yeah, what? Oh, here, this is an interesting one. We could just have the whole lecture about this. If you know, why didn't you raise your hand? I asked you. If you know, why didn't you raise your hand? When I said, if you know the definition, why wouldn't you raise your hand? Yeah.
The fear of public speaking.
The fear of public speaking. So wait, we're afraid of being the stupid person. We might also be, yeah, say more. By the way, don't kung fu kick me. It turns out that I looked at the video, you almost knocked me out, man. You guys, no wonder you guys were like this. That guy I've got doing the video production, he was like, man, did you know that guy almost knocked you out? Anyway, what were you going to say? Why wouldn't you raise your hand if you knew what the definition of education is according to Kremen? Why not? Yes?
We might believe that, information could be possibly a misconception, like maybe it's inaccurate.
We're afraid of getting it wrong, but you've seen the definition, man. I'll fast forward. Now, I'll go back. When I ask, why wouldn't you tell me? If you knew, why wouldn't you raise your hand? Because if you're afraid of being stupid, then the corresponding thing, you should be glad to be smart. Those of you who know the definition, why wouldn't you raise your hand and say, dang, I know? Yes?
Elementary school and middle school and high school basically has taught you that the middle of the pack is the safest place to be. You don't want to be at the bottom, but you don't want to...
You don't want to be at the top. Why don't you want to be on the top? You all had to be on the top 10% to get into UCSB. So I'm hearing you got to be on the top, but you don't want to be on the top. Explain. Yeah?
Because you don't want to be called the know-it-all.
You don't want to be the know-it-all.
Don't want to be on the spotlight.
You don't want to be in the spotlight. But I'm telling you, as your teacher, you got to be in the spotlight, because when I say read fast, you better read fast. So I'm hearing you. Is there attention? On the one hand, you got to be smart when the teacher's looking, but when their peers are looking, you got to turn that down a little bit, not be super smart. Yes? Yes. Yes, he says yes. How did you learn that? Let me say, learn what? Let me just say, you don't want to be caught being dumber than the person next to you. You want to be smarter than the person next to you, but you don't want the person next to you thinking that you think you're smarter than the person next to you. So when the teacher's looking, you got to be smart in a way that doesn't make it look like you think you're smarter than the person next to you. If you're not smarter than the person next to you or fearful of that, then go hide when the teacher's looking. Find a way to not get caught not knowing. Is that fair? Is that like a fair assessment? So you've learned to care when you walk into an educational encounter in school. You've learned to care about what other people think. You've learned what kinds of things they might be thinking. And you've learned who might be caring what and what they might be paying attention to. So you've learned not only what to care about, but what to pay attention to, who might be looking. And this is all what you bring to an educational encounter and what that educational encounter calls forth from you. And then it's totally unpredictable because you don't know if I'm going to stand up here and ask you individually a question. What's 2 plus 2? 4. You don't know if I'm going to do that to you or if I'm going to scan the room and land on you. You don't know, or you don't know if I'm just going to ask a general. You don't know what's going to happen, but you know what to worry about as soon as there's cause for worry. So when I ask you to please tell me when you think you might not understand something or when you have a question, because I need you to, I'm asking you to abandon or suspend a ton of stuff that you've already learned. The whole course, in a sense, is about the last 15 minutes. This is what the whole course is about, in a way. What do we learn? Where do we learn it? Is it good for us? And is school good for us because of what we learn there? I'm supposed to clap, not applause. I have to clap to sync the audio on these cameras. Great. It also provides a nice punctuation. When you don't get something or you're not sure what a question is, raise your hand, and if I can't or don't feel like answering it, I'll say so. Okay? Try. We have to be ready to be ignorant in front of each other. First, I'm going to talk to you again, just briefly, about ladders versus leaves, or ladders versus trees versus leaves. It's out of Hawkins, 1965. The title gives it away, On Living in Trees. So if you're looking at the list of readings and you say he's talking about trees and leaves, I'm not sure what reading it is. It's called On Living in Trees. Hawkins. David Hawkins writing in 1965 these ideas he'd had for a long time. And he'd had those ideas way before, other people had those ideas for centuries before. What's his big point? We can organize a learning trajectory like a ladder. We can map out somebody's learning trajectory before they get there to look like a ladder. Or we can begin to appreciate that, in fact, the way various learning pathways might take through any subject matter is more like a leaf. We have a choice. He's saying this is how it works. We can make it look like this. Our learning pathways through any subject matter might take any of the paths like the veins of a leaf. We could make it like this. This is natural. This is invented. This is how it works. This is how we can make it work. Right? It's not that sometimes learning works like this and sometimes learning works like that. He's making a much more basic point. If we could map the various pathways that someone might take through math or surfing or any subject matter, basketball or hammering a nail or construction or English literature or chemistry or whatever, we cut out some part of the natural world, some part of the world. Those are all ways of dividing up the world, right? English literature is like one small part of the world. So we take a small piece of the world and there's lots of ways to go about moving through it. You individually are not going to cover all the available pathways, but you might progress through any of those pathways. Some of them, let's talk about this leaf for a second. Some of them are much more well-traveled, much more common. The central vein of the leaf. That's why the leaf works so well, because some of these are just really, everybody kind of goes this way. This is the way it usually progresses. There are some pathways that are more commonly traveled, and then there are some pathways, the little ones, that are only rarely traveled. Ideas or questions or thoughts that might seem strange to those of us who stick on the main highways. I do want to say that sometimes somebody tries something new. Let's talk about surfing. Somebody tries something new, like some crazy aerial 360, and they land it when nobody's done it before. One of the first things people think is, wow, how did he even think of that? That never occurred to me to do that. And then maybe it becomes more well-worn as we get used to it. In any case, this is a way we might map the possible pathways through any small part of the world. If it's an academic subject or a non-academic subject, it's all the same. But we can organize it this way. When we organize it this way, for us not to be furious about travel through a subject matter that's organized like a ladder, we have to pretend that this is natural and that this is optional. We have to pretend that addition always comes before subtraction, or subtraction always comes before multiplication, or certainly multiplication comes before calculus. We have to pretend that that's somehow natural. This doesn't mean it's random. There is some kind of progress, right? But there are just many more available pathways. So this is not, on the one hand, this is an argument about how learning in the wild, learning in its natural state, learning left to it on its own will go, right? It's a statement, it's a descriptive fact, a description. This is how it is. Even if we can do this, yes?
So is the
Yay! Somebody raised a hand. There's two. Yes.
So is the distinction between tree-like learning and leaf-like learning that tree-like learning is more for an individual, and then leaf is just when you...
Much more abstract. You got it. Did you hear it? A tree, if we were to map your individual learning or yours, it's going to look like a tree. You're going to go down some pathways and come back, right? Your own course of exploration. Given an infinite amount of time, it might eventually look like a leaf, but the chances are the map, the branches, right? And dead ends of your own learning are going to look more like a tree. But if we were to lay all of our individual learning on top of each other, then it shows us what's possible, and that's going to look like a leaf. Thank you. Yes. I wouldn't have said it if you hadn't asked. There was another hand. She asked the same question. You see? That's so good. You had the same question. I'm happy. Okay. Now, the problem is that when we pretend that learning looks like this, it means when we do, and the reason I started with this, it's on the one hand, it's to help you understand something that's going to be important the whole rest of the time, right? On the other hand, it's going to be important for today. Oh, there's one more thing I did want to say about this leaves or trees versus ladders thing. On the one hand, it's a description. It's saying if we were to actually look hard enough, this is what we'd come up with. But on the other hand, it's also a kind of moral claim, right? Not just about how things are, but how things should be. So there's two kinds of claims that we might that are involved in the distinction between learning in the wild that looks like trees or leaves, if we were to map it, and learning, frankly, in school too much, where it looks like a ladder. One is a descriptive claim, and the other is a moral claim. This, we might say, is better. It's better. Now, I have all kinds of ways of thinking that this is better. But let me just, and maybe that's a claim that, I mean, David Hawkins makes it, but I think I want to take it up a little more. Why is it better? It's better. Maybe it's better to start with this. How might this be better? If we organize the trajectory of our own or somebody else's learning as if it were a straight line or a ladder, that is very, very good when there's a deadline. It's better when there's a deadline. Because golly, this is no... God, I sounded like Gomer Pyle for a minute. Golly, gosh, this takes time. And when I'm on a deadline, when we're on a deadline, when you are on a deadline, you know something that we act like we don't know until somebody tells us, which is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. We don't have time for that distraction. All depends on there being a finite amount of time. So this is better if there's a deadline. It's also better for at least one other way, and at least one other way, it's better if what we want to do is to decide who's faster and slower. If you want to decide who's faster, has anybody in here ever run a race? Ever. I'm talking about like even when you get off the bus and you go, hey man, race you to the stop sign. Have you ever run a race? Raise your hand. It would be pretty weird if you said, on your mark, get set, go, and then went, right? And started jumping. Like, on your mark, get set, go. Where am I going? To the stop sign, go. Boom, straight line. Go to the UCSB track. Not only it's not a straight line, it's an oval, right? But there are lanes, right? Ladders, straight lines, clear sequences are really good in the first place if there's a deadline. If I gotta get to the top or I gotta get to the next point, it's also really good if the goal is to decide who's faster. In other words, efficiency and ranking. This is better. If the goal is efficiency, if the goal is to rank. And I want you to hear me as clearly as possible. I don't think efficiency is a bad thing, and heck, I love to race. We race every 15 minutes in my house. Zeke, you gotta go to the restroom. Me too, go. Like, it's fun. It's not fun if you lose every time. It's also not fun if you win, but you think the other person lets you win. So when I say let's go to the bathroom, I got to go 2 on your mark, and say go, I'll fall down because I don't want him to think that I'm like, he knows if I'm going like a. Right. Racing's super fun. And if we try to get learning at a race, if we try to race through something, for goodness sakes, let's stop worrying about this and let's just cut the crap and make a clear sequence with a clear progress. Yes?
I have a question about
Yep.
the whole efficiency thing.
Yep.
I don't think that's exactly correct, just because our school system is set up like a ladder and so many people get either kicked out, dropped, and I feel like that loses all that efficiency.
All right, so they're nice. So you've already gone to it's efficient. Well, what you're pointing out, let me try this. What's your name?
Chris?
Chris? What Chris is pointing out is the ranking and the ranking consequence of this and the efficiency consequence. If we worry about equity, then it gets really troublesome. Because I can make it unproblematic and say, all right, but if you're going to drop out, anybody know a dropout? Yeah, cool. Let's get them out sooner rather than later. Let's not mess around. Let's give them a test at the beginning, and if they're not cut out for the ladder-like, race-like organization of a curriculum, then let's not waste our time. Let's not pretend that they're not going to make it. If you think that this is as crazy, just a rhetorical argument or something, people say this all the time. Let's cut the crap. Not everybody's cut out for college. So let's test them early and stop wasting the money. Your objection comes from a question of equity, right? Which is, it doesn't seem right if, in our efforts to rank and to be efficient, if when we do that well, some people just fall out. That's no good. So good. Put that on Gaucho Space. Yep.
Can it also discourage students if they see somebody, I've seen a lot of that, if they're not doing good in class, if somebody's doing better than them, they get discouraged and their grades go down just because they're trying so hard to get up the ladder and they can't because it's so slippery, so it's very just.
So we grease the ladder to make it even, but although that makes it a lot more efficient. Right? If we can make it slippery, even better. Okay, but the only objection to that, but if my goals are ranking and efficiency, I don't care. If that's my only goals, who cares? Who cares if you get discouraged? Good, let's get you discouraged sooner so you don't waste your time trying to do things you're just not cut out for. Why belabor the point? If you are not in the gifted class, let me say this. If you're not cut out to be a doctor and we could test for it at 6 years old, then let's test for it. Let's make it. In fact, I can just say, I don't care about you being discouraged, but I care so much about you not being discouraged that I'm not going to make you climb a ladder that you're going to fall off of. I'll give you a shorter ladder with rungs that are closer together, and I'll rope you in to make sure you can climb up. You see, I could make an argument against, that worries about people's emotions and feelings that would just be, I just got to make different ladders. You see? Put that question on Gaucho Space. Let's keep talking about it. More? Yeah?
I just know that this can work, but it's not a school system I want for my kids.
I need you to speak up just a little bit.
It's not a school system
system I would want for my kid.
So a ladder-like school system is not the one you would want for your kid. You guys did fine. Why wouldn't you want it for your kid?
There's no leeway. If they're not cut out, they're not cut out.
There's I could make it so there's plenty of leeway. I could make it so that there's so much leeway that instead of having one main ladder, I just make 15 ladders, a ton of leeway. If this ladder is not working for you, if the rungs are too far apart, this is all metaphor. If you're losing the metaphor, raise your hand and say, I'm getting lost. But if this ladder is not your ladder, if it's too slippery, too hard, and you don't have the right tools to get up, I'll just make a different ladder for you. There's leeway. It's not even that you're going to fall off. I'll make 5 tracks. How many tracks were there in math in your high school 11th grade class? That is your high school. How many tracks were there that you could take in math?
3 or 4.
Raise your hand and show me on your fingers. I had 3, 6, 4, 2. It's rare that you get lower than 3. Sometimes there's often as many as 6. And they have labels like what? Labels like what? Algebra is one, right? I hear AP, honors, remedial, basic, college prep, IB, super fast, brilliant smart, gifted. I don't know what they're called. When you get it's 3rd grade, it's really just a few tracks. In my daughter's school, there are 55 students in my daughter's school. The whole school. In her grade, there's 9 kids. But for some part of the day, they pull one group out for enrichment. What do you think that means? What do you think it means? Gifted, right. But you see here enrichment? Enrichment sounds so good. In my daughter's school, it means gifted. In a lot of schools, enrichment can mean remedial. We need to enrich your education. So, wait a second. There's no leeway. BS, there's tons of leeway. We can make it. In my daughter's school, there's leeway. There's only 9 kids, and yet there's plenty of leeway. If this ladder's not working for you, we're going to put you on a different one that works for you. Yeah? I want a little bit more, and then I'll get some more hands. Yeah. Yeah, but maybe you weren't cut out for that ladder. Let's stop doing with the metaphor. So what you're saying is once you're out of AP, then you're out. Okay, but maybe you weren't cut out for AP. Yeah.
Maybe you didn't want to.
Maybe you didn't want to do AP. Why would I force? What's your child's name?
River.
What is it?
River.
I know a kid named River. Is it a boy or a girl? Gender neutral. Great. I just heard this cool NPR story about bi-gender, where people actually live both genders. Gender neutral. River. It's like Chris. That is, could be either way. All right, River. Maybe River just doesn't want to be a mathematician. Then let's not force your child, River, to be a mathematician. If your child wants to be a diesel mechanic, which is hard. Anybody want a good mechanic to work on their car? Raise your hand. Do you want a mechanic who can listen? You know what a good mechanic. How do you know a good mechanic? And one of the ways that I know a good mechanic is I turn my car on and they listen to it and they go, you got a little leaky valve. And I'm like, really? How'd you hear that, Ray? I've worked on cars a lot where they can hear, you want that kind of mechanic. If River wants to be a mechanic, then let's get River in mechanic stuff early so that when I take my car to River's brilliant as a mechanic. What's the problem? Yeah?
So the whole leeway thing of different ladders doesn't get rid of your efficiency problem where people are going to get discouraged. Because it's obvious, if I'm on this ladder, my rungs are this,
yeah,
and the other guy has a way bigger ladder, it's going to suck for me.
All right, so but we can solve that problem. You guys have any idea? I have an idea for how to solve that problem. You hear what it says? If I have to if I have to bump into you and I'm like, hey, what's your name?
Amanda.
What is it?
Amanda.
And I go Amanda's on the tall ladder, and I'm on the shorter ladder. And every time I bump into Amanda, I'm gonna be like, psh, I wish I was like Amanda. I can solve that problem. I send you to a different school, and me to a different school. Just make sure we don't bump into each other. I'll make sure you get into a place where the only people around you are on the same ladder. Therefore, you don't feel discouraged. If I can be worried about discouragement and have in mind efficiency, and I can design you a school system. Where does it break down? Yeah.
Well, it seems like no matter what type of ladder you're on, you're not going to be able to explore. Whether or not you feel like you're on an okay ladder, or you feel
Is that what you meant by leeway? Exploring? So you just heard, the problem is not that there's not leeway. The problem is, on this, there's no room for exploration. Of course there's room for exploration. When the bell rings, you got all day from 3:30. Why are you laughing? I'm dead goddamn serious. You can explore all you got weekends? You got 3:30, let's say it takes you 25 minutes to get home. Let's say we got all the money in the world, so we got an efficient bus system, we can transport you home, whatever. You can go into the woods, you can explore in your backyard. Exploration can happen anywhere, am I right? Yeah, so whatever. 3:30, ring. School's out. And I know this works. How do I know it works? Because the minute the bell rings, kids jam out of the school. Woo! Let them explore at home.
This just seems to me like a cop-out for lazy teachers and bad school system. And how do we know this isn't just
What's a cop-out? What's a cop-out?
having the ladder system, having a system where the teacher can move away bad students to a different classroom, to a different place, just because they're bad or not smart enough. And that seems like lazy.
Right. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that you see that also it's also lazy if I just move the smart kids or fast kids into a certain place. Smart should always be in quotes from this point forward your whole life. If there's nothing else you get, like whenever you say smart, see Jason Duque standing up here going air quotes smart, right? Okay, so smart, right? Okay. Yeah, so the problem, it's a cop-out. It's a cop-out. What's it a cop-out from? Why would you want this? I can get you this cheaply. Hand way in the back, only because I keep focusing on the people up here. Way in the back.
I want to kind of go back to the river argument because we're talking about
River. You're a child, River.
be a mechanic, right? And we said, well, let's get into like vocational training.
Or her. Yeah.
Or,
yeah.
But what about, like, get them into business or her into business?
Well, why you got against mechanics?
Learn how to create, multiple auto shops.
Great.
Create wealth for themselves.
Great.
And what about, an auto appraiser, like somebody who only appraises cars to go to auction or things like that. There's so many options as opposed to just being a mechanic. Oh, you like cars? Work on cars. Be a grease monkey.
I just want to make sure. Funny. I'm so glad I'm so glad you rejected my multiple attempts to interrupt. Because grease monkey. Like, I don't know. Does anybody want to go? Woo! I want to be a grease monkey. What? Like grease monkey doesn't. That sounds bad, right?
Yes.
Yeah, why? So, but look, if River's gonna be, all of your children are named River now. If River's gonna be happy being, I get it. Okay, so your point's well, right? Is that like if this is auto, cars, right? Mechanics is just one branch, and there's a lot of other branches. So a way to use this metaphor is to say, look, I'll carve out a portion of the real world that's called automotive, right? And there's so many other areas. But what if River wants to be a mechanic? That's where it started. And I'm taking River very seriously. River doesn't want to be an appraiser. River doesn't want to be a designer. River doesn't want to be an auto body specialist. River doesn't want to be a restorer. River doesn't want to be a car salesperson. River doesn't want to be working for Pixar on the next Cars movie. River wants to be greasy. River wants to wrench on cars and be good at it. Why you guys have a problem with that? Yeah? No, nope. Yeah.
Because that's something for River to decide to explore through this on her own branch and decide.
All right, so perfect. So let me do this. We'll give a little bit of exploration. That'll be the first couple years of school, 3 or 4 years. I don't know. There's some exploration where you decide what you like, and once you decide what you like, then you pick, and then once you pick, I make it a ladder because we want to get you there fast and furiously. That was a nice. You get the pun. You get the little reference. Fast and Furious with cars. That was not. That was cool. That's how your brain works. In the back.
But also, it becomes an issue because at what age do you know that that's exactly what they want to do for the rest of their life? And then.
So what you're suggesting is that efficiency. Do you hear the question? Like, at what age do you know? I was just telling the guy who's in charge of all the media in the class, I was like, man, just the other day I was driving on the freeway and I looked over and I was like, I told my daughter, I said, there's a helicopter I saw. We live out in the country, so there's helicopters all around Sprague stuff. I looked and I said, you know what, Lil? I said, I wish I was a helicopter pilot. Like really, it wasn't like, that would be fun, but like, man, I wish that at the point where they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I went, helicopter pilot. I could do that all day, every day, I think. I never got a chance to try, so I don't know. So I'm trying to tell a short story to emphasize your point. We don't know. At what age do we know? What you're saying is doing it this way cuts off our knowing, even if we do it later, even if we postpone it for later. That doing this means that we might, there's always a risk we'll do it prematurely. Because how do we know what we want to be when we grow up?
Also, like, just because you want to do something when you're younger, like, it can be very general, and there's so many specific things that you can explore later, like you was pointing out, that you might really like cars, like working on cars, and maybe you want to run your own shop, maybe you don't, and as you learn, like, maybe you want to focus on one type of car.
Sure.
For me, I knew that I wanted to do science as biology, but I didn't know.
What kind of biology, what you wanted to look at? You want to look at muskrats or sea anemones?
Well, now sea anemones. But I was always like, I just love animals. And you hear people say, like, I love animals, I want to be a vet. Or like, I love animals, maybe I want to be a biologist. And like, just based on the animals, you pick what you want. And so there's no track for animals. You know, or like if you make a track for animals, there's still so many logistics.
So you're agreeing with this point, right? Which is it's like, we don't want to do this too early or too aggressively. We don't want to do this too early or too aggressively. Because this is how the world works and we want to leave it open for our own children.
Most of this, I'd say, life in general, regardless of what and it was so very good that turbines were increased.
Yeah.
The environment, they don't understand really.
Sure.
Everything is cross-disciplinary, and because before the ladder, just to make everything worse, have other individuals and create a society
Your voice is clear, but it doesn't carry super well, so I'm going to try to both repeat it back to you, but also repeat it to the group. Is that okay? I'm going to use slightly different language, though. There's an objection that when you do this, right, what you lack is the connection between subject areas, right? People wind up being experts in the university. It's called, they talk about it as silos. It's about a grain silo, right? You put walls around it, and then there's no connection to other kinds of knowing. So what you have is somebody who is in a position to make decisions, right, but who doesn't have connections to other kinds of knowing. Is that right? And that's a worry for you. So it's not just about your child, River, it's also about the world we live in. Is that fair enough to say? So you're worried about River, your own child, what's Owen, Melanie, River, Sanaya, right? You're worried about these kids, but you're also worried about who the world these kids are going to make that you're going to grow up in, right? Okay, right on. So for two reasons, I'm hearing two different lines of argument in favor of trees and leaves versus ladders. Great, but I can't do that in school, might be the argument, right? We only have you a certain amount of time, so we got to move you along fast. We have to pause. This is exactly what I would dream of for a lecture where people are raising hands and asking questions. But I want to get to the education versus learning versus schooling point and make sure we cover that today. Now, those of you who've had hands up, and even those of you who haven't, but whose minds have got a bunch of questions, this is whatever you're thinking right now, see what that would look like to put on Gaucho Space to have other people engage with. Okay, so the reason I brought this up now, right, is because we're going to have to go backwards. we're going to have to recover some of the same material. And if you're thinking about learning like a ladder, that's going to feel like unnecessary climbing down, moving backward. But if you're thinking about it like a tree, which is the way I think about it, then I hope you think about having to review, not as a problem, not as a response to some perceived failure, but rather as something that we ought to be doing anyway. And your results on the quiz just tell me now's the right time to do it. We should do it anyway, and now's the right time to do it. Okay, fair enough. Here's the definition. Deliberate, systematic, sustained effort to transmit, evoke, or acquire knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities, and any learning that results from the effort, direct or indirect, intended or unintended. Okay, so I say this, everybody was able to do this. You guys nailed it. I'm not going to ask this question again, okay? There's no reason to. But the second part of it, which is explain to me the difference between learning, education, and schooling, I think part of the problem is I failed to tell you why that was important, so it had no place to land. The question had nowhere to sink in. So I'm going to try to explain that to you now. I'm going to talk fast. Note takers, your pens should be moving. So, what do we know? We know learning's wild, which means we're always learning more than one thing at a time. We're always learning, period. We're always learning more than one thing at a time, period. They're two separate points, right? There's no off switch. But there's two questions we can ask right from the beginning about learning. And one of them, write these down if you're a note taker. If you're not a note taker, at least just try to remember them. There's two questions we can ask with respect to our gingerbread, with respect to learning. Let me back up for a second. There are two questions that the learning is wild claim allows us to ask. One of them is about individual people, your own child, Rivers, whoever else, Sanaya, whoever else. And the other one is about environments, both people and environments. The question we can ask with learning, that definition of learning, the first question is about people. And that's the one I started to get to already. And that question is, what does somebody bring from one scene to the next? And the question I asked you for your own gingerbread kid was, what do you want your child to take from your front door to the real world, from one scene to the next? The question we can ask, that's about learning the people, right? Learning as a thing that we carry with us, or it's learning as a set of things that we carry with us. Learning as a noun. Right? If we think of learning as knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities, learning as a noun, then we can ask the question, what do we bring from one scene to the next? Knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, sensibilities, see, think, do, say, make, believe, head, heart, soul, whatever. But the question we can ask about environment, so we can ask about this kid, right? This kid, remember this baby rolling around? We can say, what does that child bring from before we pressed record to the minute that we pressed record? Or we can even do it in spaces. What does that child bring from all the settings that child has grown up in up until this moment to that room? What does the child bring? What does the child want? What does the child desire? We know that some part of it is genetic. We know that people are not all born the same. We also know that some of it is learned. The learning we bring, the thing, the noun, learning, parenthesis, noun that we bring. But then we can also ask about scenes or environments, what is called forth? What is demanded by that scene? Demanded or made possible? That's talking about learning as a verb. We can ask two questions. One, the noun, what do we bring? And the other, the verb. What does the situation call forth from us? What does the situation demand, require? What does the situation tell us? What does the situation direct us? So we can ask about learning. We can say, when we ask about learning, this kind of question for your gingerbread kid, what do we want that child, your child, to take from one scene to the next, knowing that we don't know what that scene's going to be and we can't control it? Note takers, write that down. We don't know what the scenes are going to be. And even if we know that we're going to put a child in that room, we don't know exactly what's going to happen after the first second. So given that the scenes our children are going to walk into, what do we hope they take with us? But then also, any given scene, what is the learning, what is the knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities that's demanded or offered by a scene? Brought up, called forth. So I look at this and I say, this scene, right, the learning that this scene demands of a child is something like exploration. It demands or calls forth or reinforces or brings up a desire to explore. You put me in a room filled with a bunch of toys and I'm going to start playing. You put a baby in a room full of toys and they're going to start crawling around, trying to find stuff, wiggle stuff, put it in their mouth, right? Put it in their nose or their ear. Watch America's Funniest Home Videos. You see that people do crazy things with the environments they're in. I put somebody in this environment. Sorry, it's going to try to play it, and I don't actually want it to play it. Put somebody in this environment. This is my daughter. I'll show you this video later to make another point. There's an environment. This isn't just a bunch of toys. This is a monkey rings set. Raise your hand if you can go right now. If I put you on these monkey rings, you could go across the monkey rings. Raise your hand if you could. Keep your hand up. Look around. If you guys want to learn how to do monkey rings, you've got your tutors. My daughter goes to this and she doesn't know how. Right? She can't do the monkey ringy part. She was 4. She can't do the monkey ringy part, but she managed to be able to go across the top. She's pretty yoked, so. Right? She just is. She's pretty. So, what does she bring to the scene? And then what does the scene demand of her? What does she bring to the scene? I know my daughter, and I don't even need to know my daughter. I can just watch what she does, and I can kind of infer what she brings. She sees something like that, and she goes, I'm going to try to do whatever looks like could be done on that thing. So she climbs this thing. She climbs the little stair, the little ladder. She climbs a little ladder on the side, leans forward, right? Or she climbs up and goes across. So what is it she brings to it? A kind of, it's almost like an impulse to find things she can't yet do and try them. Do you know somebody like this? Are you one of these people, maybe? How do you know who these people, how do you know that this is what, well, it's the kind of person who, Samuel, I say, ever stretch out, and he's like, man, I'm going to get up there and do the splits. Pow! Like, woo, I'm never. It's also, how do you know this? It's somebody who, faced with something scary, jumping off a cliff, not a cliff, that would be, nice ocean, seeing the waves crashing upon the shore. Some people go, man, and some people go, take their shirts off. I'm not going to take my shirt off. They take their shirts off and they run in. Some people run, they go underneath and they're laughing. We have a friend named Mary, and she did, you put her in any situation and she's bloody by the end and going, ha ha, I love it. Then she wants to keep doing it until she figures it out, and the minute that she figures out, she's on to the next thing. I suspect those of you who play video games have a little bit of this in you. Because video games are designed for you. If what you want is the next challenge as soon as you master the last, video games are designed. The minute that you master something, within a fraction of a second, the next challenge is in front of you. You think you got that? Next level. So she brings that to this monkey rings. But the monkey rings doesn't just demand that of her, it kind of offers that up. But it demands a whole bunch of skills that she doesn't have. Grip, swing, balance, a whole bunch of stuff her body doesn't know how to do that she's learning how to do. So every situation that we're in, we can ask the 2 learning questions. What does a person bring? Maybe I'll add to that one. There's maybe two parts to that. What does a person bring to that? Knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, or sensibilities. And what might a person leave with from that scene? That's the way to do it. What does a person bring, and what does a person take? But then also, what does the situation demand? This is one kind of scene. This is another kind of scene. This is a scene, an elevator. Now, why elevators? Why elevators? Because elevators we do without even knowing it. And having raised small children, I know, and you would know too if you're around kids, elevators are much less, once you're around kids, you realize you can't really take them for granted. Right? We one time lost my middle daughter. She got into an elevator. She didn't know that she had to. Anyway, she wound up on the bottom floor of the hotel while we were on the 3rd floor. Crying. I think we almost got arrested, I'm sure, because it looked like we'd abandoned the child. You can get in an elevator. Any of you can walk into an elevator probably right now and have no problem. So why would we ask a learning question? Well, because what this calls forth is not new stuff. What this calls forth is a kind of practice. Elevators call forth or demand of you that you practice a routine you already know. And every time that you practice a routine that you already know, it begins to seem more and more natural. Even though if you were to walk into an elevator and you've never been in one before, you might go, what in the world? And if you're anything like my son, you press all the buttons. But then you learn, and how do you learn? How do you learn? Wait a second, how do you learn that routine in the first place? How many of you ever enrolled in Elevator 101 at your high school or college? None of you. I hope none of you. I hope we don't even offer that class. That would be insane. The answer is probably none of you. I hope none of you. But you learned it because you walk in and you see what other people are doing, right? So if you don't already know how to do an elevator, you just watch how people do it and you pick up on it. Call that learning. If you do already know, then you just practice it. Call that reinforcement, which is another kind of learning. All right. So 2 questions we can ask about learning. And here's where the learning versus education versus schooling thing ought to take off. Okay? Education involves learning. We know that from the definition. And any learning that results from the effort, direct or indirect, intended or unintended. But there's a whole lot of learning that leaks out of any educational encounter that we might build. Education is when we try to do it on purpose. And a lot of you got that. Education is when you try to do on purpose. Right? But it's not as if education or learning is one thing and education is another thing. Learning's happening all the time. Education, the difference between education and learning is education adds to learning that's already happening anyway, our own effort to make it go in a way that we want. So we're learning anyway, and education just adds to that, right? I know the picture makes it look like it's smaller. The idea is learning's happening all the time. Education is a narrower thing that we get narrower by adding the qualification of deliberate, systematic, sustained effort. It's the stuff we try to do on purpose. But it's not like, the relationship between learning and education is not like, here I'm doing learning, which is wild, and here I'm doing education, which is not learning. They're just not the same thing. I'm doing learning all the time. Education just adds to it the stuff when we try to do it on purpose. Okay, got that so far? Now's a good time to raise your hand if you have a question. Yeah?
Isn't the question the difference between education and schooling?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you want to? I'll skip this one. Collect your check at the end of class. Right. So given that learning is happening all the time, education is a way to describe. Education is not a way to describe learning. Education is a way to describe certain kinds of scenes. I call them educational encounters when there's some kind of intention. Right? That's going to get confusing. Forget that slide for a second. I'll take it out when I post it online. So, education is about saying, is this an educational encounter or just an everyday non-educational encounter? And the way to distinguish between those two is this when somebody's trying to do something on purpose to transmit, evoke, or acquire knowledge, attitudes, values, skills, etc., or is this just me going about my business? Elevators are not education scenes, but they're learning scenes. The monkey rings I would call an education scene. It's also a learning scene. How is the monkey rings an education scene? Because my daughter makes it an education scene. Because she looks at that and she goes, I want to figure this out. And when I play you the video, what does she say? She says, Daddy, I need your help. I don't know how to do this. I can't go across and I want to figure it out. And she tries it multiple times. She even done this marvelous thing. I'll give you, I don't even know how she learned that. Spits on her hands and goes like this. Like, I got to get him sticky, right? She picked up on that somewhere. So for her, she turns that scene into an education scene. There's no teacher, and I reject her invitation to become a teacher because I don't want to be asked to go on the monkey rings because I haven't tried it out because I'm embarrassed about failing in front of her too, right? She turns it into an education scene by her effort. It's her effort. Her trying to do something, but knowing that she's going to learn a bunch of other stuff along the way. School is what? School is just one very deeply patterned way of organizing educational encounters. There are a lot of other ways to do it. The difference between education and schooling is not the same as the difference between learning and education. Learning's happening all the time. Sometimes the encounters with the world are situations or education situations, right? But among all the different ways we might do it on purpose, all the different ways we might arrange an educational environment, school is just one particular way. And what is the school way? Well, there's typically buildings with rooms. That's pretty common, right? And a lot of time, you can show this almost anywhere in the world. This is from, oh, whoa. You can show, I might have just quit, let's see. You can show this almost anywhere in the world, and it's recognizable as school. Teacher high, chalkboards, all that stuff. There are a lot of other ways of arranging educational encounters, like, for example, my daughter arranging her own educational encounter with the monkey rings and recruiting me into it, trying to, right? She turns that into an educational encounter, but it's not school. The minute that you go online, trying to find whatever, phone, right? You're trying to find whatever you're trying to find online, I call that an educational encounter. The minute that you try to go before practice and practice your shots, the minute that you take apart an engine, the minute that, right? I would call those educational encounters in the sense that you're trying to learn something. And if I'm the teacher and I'm this is an educational encounter. There's a whole lot of learning going on that is probably a lot that I don't intend. But this one is an educational encounter that's arranged in a particular way that is recognizable as school. So school's just one way to do educational encounters. You've heard that the best way to learn to swim is to get in the water, right? Maybe you've not heard that, but I've heard it. Just throw you in the water. There's another way to arrange learning how to swim, which is that I sit next to you and hold you, guide you, tell you how to, right? Much more instructional. I could do swimming school pretty easily. I could get you all in the water, and I could make you practice the same little thing over and over again. Everybody grab the side of the pool, kick. I could turn it into swimming school. School's just one way of arranging educational encounters. Yep.
The way I'm understanding it is learning is something you come across without you're not seeking out for it, it's just something that you learn.
You might be seeking it out, but you don't have to be seeking it out for it to happen.
Okay, so if it's like something you just come across without you trying to seek it out, that's learning?
Yeah.
But if you seek it out, that's learning.
Yeah, if you're trying to, right? If there's an effort, it's the first line, the deliberate, systematic, sustained effort. All of you learned language, probably without trying to. But you could also try to learn a language. Okay? Yeah.
In regards to the difference between education and schooling,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like college is more of an educational pattern because we're deciding what classes we want to take and the path that we want to choose, but schooling is more of the K through 12 because we're told to go to school and we don't choose what we learn, we just learn it all.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's worth asking. Do you hear what she's saying? She's saying college is not like school, but like K-12. I want you to work that out. Because what I want to say is I want to have a conversation with you about that right now, but everybody else would just be witnesses and spectators. I think you take that onto Gaucho Space and have in it, is college school or not? I mean, just ask that question and then make your point. I don't think college is really school, it's really K-12. Another hand up somewhere? Yep, James. Oh, yes.
So with the example of the elevator and the monkey rings,
Yeah.
It seems like the learning part was just like the person goes into the elevator and sees what's happening, and like that's how that person learned. But what if your daughter was around a bunch of kids on the monkey rings, and then so she just learned it? So is it no longer like an educational thing, or is it still?
Do you hear the question? My daughter just goes and watches on the monkey rings. I would call that not an educational encounter, right? Unless what she's doing is watching to try to figure it out.
Well, wouldn't you watch to figure out how to use the elevator?
I've watched tons and tons of sports games on television, and I'm not watching it to go, how would I do that? Right? I'm just watching because it's entertainment, right? So what makes it education is the deliberate, systematic, sustained effort. I'm trying. This is the effort part. Now, so what does that mean? What does that question lead us to? It's that we can't tell just by looking whether or not it's educational or learning. We know that it's always learning, right? But we don't know whether it's educational. Well, okay, no, who cares, right? Who cares? I told you we'd get to a quiz. Guess what? You'll take a quiz on the first thing on Tuesday. I'm going to ask the same question. I'll show you what the quiz is in a second. It'll be what you get asked on Tuesday. So some of you have been through this whole day and you don't see how it's going to end up, except maybe now you have a better understanding of learning education versus education versus schooling. So where this ends for me is that this is all a lead up. It's all a basis for asking and then material for answering the following question. Do we even need school? Do we even need school? Because if the learning that we want for our own children could be accomplished otherwise, then let's do it otherwise. That's the first question. And the second question is, if we're going to do school, if our answer is yes, we need school because there's certain things that can only be learned in school, then we can ask the next question, which is, all right, however we arrange school, is what people actually learn in school what we want them to learn in school? So do we need school? And then if we answer in the affirmative yes, right, then is what people are learning what we want them to learn in school? And those questions are really what animate the entire course. I'm convinced that if what we need to do is learn how to fix diesel engines, we don't need school. If what we need to do is learn how to code on a computer, we don't need school. We can go online and take Khan Academy classes on coding. So do we need school? Now, on your way out today, make sure you just smile at your TA today. I will see you on Tuesday.